All right, hello everybody. We are back, and it is that time. That is right. We are doing a tier list. So I want to clarify that this tier list is going to be for patch 1.6, not 1.6.1, not 1.6.2. This is for 1.6, and I hope that this tier list can still be a good reference for the future patches of 1.6.1 and onward, and so forth. But know that there are going to be some balance changes that probably won't that will probably switch things up in the future. But for now, I'm hoping that this will be a really valuable resource for those of you who are playing the game in 1.6. Additionally, I am hoping to at some point have timestamps in the description so that you guys can just quickly reference if you just want to know my reasoning as for why I'm putting one tem in one tier and so on and so forth. But yeah, so this is kind of like a longer tier list rather than just having it done and then kind of explaining the overarching reasoning. I'm going to go through each tem and give a brief reason as to why I think it is where it is. Last time I did this on stream, but I kind of wanted to just, streamline it for you guys and just cut out some of the extra stuff that you guys don't even really need. You'd rather just have me explain rather than be convinced by my chat, probably. So we are here and we're going to get started. So the first one is Mimit. So Mimit is relatively flexible. Ever since the striking nerf, it probably hasn't. It's not as strong as it used to be. There's still some strong landing combos such as Nature Coish and Tuvine, but in general, I think it's at about a reasonable power level. I think that there's a few things they could do with Mimit to spice it up a little bit, but in its current state, I think it's probably about a B tier. Not too strong, not too weak. In the right hands, it can still be extremely valuable on a team, but in general, I just place it right at B. And I think I should also mention that I think a lot of Tems are going to fall in B tier or very close. Krema's been doing a really good job of balancing Temtem, so that most of them are getting closer to the average, and so we shouldn't see too many outliers, I'm hoping. I think they've been cleaning up a lot of the D tiers. They haven't been nerfing A tiers as much, but, we'll just continue. Zalbian. So one of the more interesting changes this patch, well, I guess it wasn't more interesting, but one of the more impactful ones was the fact that Oshiara lost Waterblade, because Oshiara was about the only top tier that got nerfed this patch. And the fact that it lost Waterblade, even though it did get some changes in compensation for that, it did lose Waterblade, and so now Digis are able to roam even just a little bit more free than they were used to. So Zalbian is one of those Digis that's super flexible, and it's kind of part of the problem core of Zalbian Munko Reignit. And so I'm going to put it in B plus tier because it's not super splashable, but in that right team combination, it is absolutely a threat. So next up are all the Chromions, but I'm actually not going to go through those because it would take a long time, and most of them kind of end up in like D or F tier, which doesn't even exist. Like Digichromion, I'm sorry, you're in F tier. I may at the end go through Koishas and Chromions and just kind of place some of the more viable ones in tiers, but for now I'm going to skip over them. So now we have Molgu. So Molgu didn't receive many changes this last patch, but it did get Rush is back down to 0 hold, which is kind of a nice buff for it, but it wouldn't change its tier position at all. I think it's a solid B tier. It's still very nice as a Faraday Cage user. It's good with Reactive Vial, which didn't get changed. Splitter, it has 2 super powerful traits. Splitter just makes it so it's immune to almost all status ailments, and Sentinel's like sleep support, like anti-sleep support, on a Tem that is bulky enough to stick around for a few turns is super good as well. But it's never going to be a Tem that you will like carry a game for you. It's a solid support bruiser sort of combo that I think is about at a balanced power level. Next up we have Platamus. So Platamus in either 1.5.1 or 1.5.2, Toxin Shower did get nerfed to 1 turn of evasion. However, the thing is that between Rotten Goo, Aqua Bullet Hell, and Aquatic Whirlwind, I mean, really, Aqua Bullet and Rotten Goo, it still has both of its stabs turn 1. It's fast. It still can click Toxin Shower and get value. And Aquatic Whirlwind is still a nuke. And just its typing is crazy. Platamus is still an A tier. If anything, like, it just hasn't fallen. There's been no counters to it that have arisen in the ranks. There will always just kind of be a... Toxics are kept in line by wins, and wins are more valuable because of toxics. So toxics and wins are just kind of together going to be a top tier for most of them. And then there's like Ghouler, but you know, in general, lots of toxics and wins are just strong all around. And I could go into an in-depth explanation as to why those two types are so strong, but Platamus just has all the options it needs, a good stat spread, and a great typing. So it lands in A tier. Consistency, yeah, it's just up there. Platox got some buffs too, so it could even be a Tem that's maybe like in C or D tier because of Toxifier, but we're gonna ignore all mid and baby evolutions, even the viable ones like Orphyll, just because I think they'll kind of clog up the list, and for the most part I don't want to misguide you guys by having something like Orphyll in like B or B plus tier, and then you'll be like, why is that there? I think it would just be better to leave them out. So Lawali. I think I put Lawali in B- before, but I've been using it, and its typing is still really good. It's a wind type. It is actually weak to Toxic and Fire. Getting walled by Tolkien, which is just so prevalent, kind of hurts it, but it has its use. I definitely wouldn't say it's below average. I'm actually finding myself using it quite a bit, just as an offensive nature, because as soon as Volphy lost Sludge Gift, your offensive nature's availability is kind of like Chimerian, which is only half a nature. You can still run Volphy, but you kind of are only running it with one type. And stuff that's slow like Baboa. So Lawali has that faster, aggressive nature type that's really only filled by itself and Volphy. And so that in itself is valuable. And I think it's just a really solid Tem all around. It's even got support options with backhanded if you want. I tried it out a little bit. It's not great, but the option's there. Turbo is just valuable to have on any team, and Lawali has a slot where it can run it. So I think B tier is solid for it. Tataru, oh man. So Tataru was kind of like the one mistake of the patch. Resilience was absolutely overtuned. It was bugged on release, but Kreml was able to patch the bug very quickly, so that's good. However, unfortunately, the fact that Tataru can rage turn 1 to get +4 attack and then +3 speed as soon as its trait resilient procs just makes it so you're pretty much guaranteed to get a 2-for-1 trade with Tataru every single game at minimum, because it's because of Talisman. People run Talisman on it to prevent the Doom, if anyone was wondering. And there's just not a whole lot of counterplay to it right now besides having multiple mentals. And so just it's really undisputably an S tier. It will get nerfed. So for anyone probably watching in 1.6.1, I would say Tataru is nowhere near this strong. It depends on how much they nerf it. I'm assuming they're just going to take the speed boost down to 1. And then it would probably just be a B or B plus tier. Hard to say because that patch isn't out yet and we don't know. But in 1.6, S tier. After some nerfs, probably B or B plus because Resilient is still a very strong trait. Grunder. Grunder's definitely on the upper tiers of Toxic. It is kind of interesting because it's kept in check by not having an electric move turn 1. However, just Nox Bomb is quite a bit of pressure. Its defensive typing and even stats are really solid. Because it's got one of the highest special defense stats in the game. I mean, it's not like top tier in that way, but I think it's in the top 10 special defense. Which basically, if you're trying to beat the thing down with neutral special attacks, you're just not going to be able to pull it off. And it can beat you down with a strong attack stat, beef up, and it's even got access to paralyzing poison, which is a great debilitating move if you want to play it on a slower team. So, and then thick skin to give it an additional resist on top of its typing. Gets walled by earth and crystal, but that's okay. You just have some answers to earths and crystals. And if you're really struggling with them, you can run like wastewater, so you have a toxic tick to even deal some true damage to them through a resist. So it's just, I'm kind of torn between B plus and A tier. because Garender has more clear counters than some other options. Like Platamus is pretty much only walled by Toxics that both toxic and water can't hit super effective, which isn't a whole lot. And then Garender is walled by 2 entire types, so that's a bit more. And then also it doesn't have a turn 1 of both stabs, unlike Platamus. So I think for that reason, I am gonna put Garender down here. Garender is also vulnerable to more forms of control, like evasion and sleep, because it's slower. But overall, it's still a very solid Tem. Toxic type is so great defensively, and it's got lots of tools that it can use. Magmut. Alright, so Magmut got trampled this patch. I think that's about the only thing it got. Now, Trample's a signature move for it. That's 4 hold, and if it gets a KO with it, it gets +3 attack and special attack. It's got synergy. It's got some other stuff, and it's just bad. The move, if I was rating the move, I would say D tier. Like, there's no situation where you would run Trample that you can't already run a different move to more success. But Magmut as a Tem isn't that bad. Magmut will always be a Tem, I think, that's just... It's going to be either useful or useless based on the current meta. Because back when Gialis was popular, Magmut is one of the only Tems in the game that can completely wall Gialis. And not only that, but with its trait, Fizzgulp, it actually heals off of Gialis' damage. So it's in any meta where Gialis is like top tier, like it was for a while, Magmut has a great use. But in general, I gotta say Magmut's probably a bit below the curve, just because its stats are aimed so much towards balance between its attack stats and defense stats that it doesn't excel anywhere that another Tem couldn't do better. And also, it's just in this current meta, the typings just aren't in favor for it. Lots of top meta Tems are waters, toxics, and mentals, as you'll probably see towards the end of it. And Magmut just doesn't like any of those. I mean, toxics aren't as bad, but true damages, so that's a problem for it. All right, Grandpa. So Bully got a little buff. You know, I haven't used it at all. It's 5%. It really doesn't matter. I think they would have been better off buffing Bird Season. But Grandpa's not bad. It's pretty much your best option if you want a speed control plus a sleep support. It does have low stamina though. But I can't put it anywhere above B- tier. So many other wins offer more than Grandpa does. It has that niche with the speed and Hypno. But you're also competing with Nox, and it's not like the most common thing you'd want on a team either. So, yeah, I think B- is good for it. Amphitheater didn't get any good changes this patch. It did get hit with the Tesla Prison nerf, though, just kind of from Lawali. Or, no, Gazuma, I'm looking at Lawali, but it's Gazuma. Gazuma got hit with the Tesla Prison nerf, and it just kind of leaked over to all the other Tesla Prison users, which probably hit Amphitheater the hardest, because Amphitheater really gets a lot of value out of Tesla Prison. Being so fast and being able to get on-tempo speed changes is valuable. However, I don't know how, like, stamina-wise, like, Amphitheater struggles as well. So the fact that it hits stamina and not damage is probably also important. But I don't think Amphitheater's bad. It's still the fastest Tem in the game, has evasion moves, it still has 2 strong dual stabs, 2 strong traits. Relaxed in particular is still quite strong, and I like settling. I think it still has its use. It's just probably hold into a stamina item even more than it was before. Next is Mudrid. So funny enough, Mudrid didn't get any buffs this patch, at least I don't, and none of them that mattered. But Bun Bun actually got the new broken trait of Resilient that Tataru has. And Mudrid would have loved that trait. Mudrid really wants some sort of trait that can help keep it alive or something. Because its only niche for a while has been Crystal Deluge. And then just being fast, but it's not quite fast enough to outspeed a max speed Gialis or Oshiara or Ukama. And it's doesn't have any turn 1 prio outside of Crystal Dust, which isn't all that strong. It's hard to justify Mudrid over Crystals, and Mudrid as an Earth is just horrible. Its defensive type chart is bad. And if you, in metas where like the general bulk level has been rising for a long time, and so Mudred being able to get a KO turn one with another powerful turn one Tem is just low to impossible chance, and so I just think Mudred's got to be a C tier. It probably needs more help than most Tems on the list. I'm not putting it in D tier because Crystal Deluge on its own is a very strong option. And it's not like Mudred's weak. It has a good special attack stat and it has a good speed stat. It's just its defensive typing keeps it in a tough spot. But I've used it before. It's nice. Now that there's more mentals around, I think it is more viable than before, I guess. So it kind of got buffed in that way. But it's just basically keeping it at a D tier at C. I don't think I would ever put it in B- in its current state. I think it's just going to be a C tier. Taifu. Taifu might be the only D tier, like the one that I can think of right now. Because Taifu needs help. It's got low speed, low defense, and low HP. Meaning that what Taifu wants to do is tank and deal damage because it heals with Leech. But if you invest in special attack to deal damage and heal with Leech, then you're not investing in defense to actually survive, and then you're not investing in speed anyways. So, and it's only a monotype, even though it's got its trait that gives it more coverage on moves. It lowers its stab on Leech. I don't know. I think they need to remove the damage reduction on nature moves from natural conversion, and then also raise the healing from safe retreat to 3 turns of regen. I think that would put Taifu in a much better spot. Taifu's still a good raid boss if you can get the buffs off on it, but the fact remains that there's just going to be better raid bosses out there. Like, if you would rather run like Nidrasil or Cernif to do pretty much the same exact thing that Taifu does. It's unfortunate. I like Taifu, but it just struggles in everything that it wants to excel at. Even with its just niche move of Leech, it can't really use it to its full potential. And so I have to put it in D tier. Next up we have Whiplump. Whiplump's been seeing a lot of use on freeze teams. I think that's about it though. Its typing is still tough. It has Hyperkinetic Strike. You'd think you can combo it better with Turbo Choreography, but that's kind of tough. And the Water Cannon plus Venom Spread combo teams have kind of fallen off just because of the sheer amount of toxics around. That's like the one typing that counters that combo adequately. And because there's so many of them around, it's hard to pull off consistently. So, I mean, Whipbump has its niche in freeze teams, and it does that well. I'm not going to take that away from it. But because that's about the only thing it's used for, I have to put it in B- tier. So basically, I mean, B- is basically like it has a niche. Most other Tems will do it better, and you're not going to splash it onto most teams. And that's where Whiplump fits pretty well. Next up, we got Scunch. So Scunch got the attack buffs in 1.6.2, I believe. It got Brawny buffed and an attack buff, which kind of gave it a ton of power. It made it from more of just a P-Jab to support into something that is an offensive threat. And it definitely it shook up the world's competition quite a bit. Since then, it did receive a small attack nerf. It wasn't a whole lot, but it does put it a bit more in line now. I'm probably just going to put it in B tier. The only thing preventing me from putting it in B+ tier is the fact that there are more mentals around in this patch, and so Scunch can't roam for free anymore. During the Worlds meta, the only mental around was pretty much Moala that was everywhere, and so Moala's not really great offensively, and just having to avoid or ban one mental makes Scunch able to roam relatively free. But now that that's not the case, and the attack nerf, it's probably just about average. Basically back to its support that has offensive options when needed, which is probably a good spot for it. Next we have Mouflank. Mouflank's probably just going to be B+. It's relatively splashable. It's a strong neutral, hits hard, has prio, has speed options. Both of its traits are very good. It's pretty much your only option if you want a faster attacking neutral. It didn't get any changes this patch, but that's fine because it was always higher tier. I think I could almost put it in A tier. I'm gonna put it in A tier just because it's so, well, no, we'll put it in B+ because of the mental prevalence, like I was mentioning. It's been A tier for a long time just because of its consistency. And because it is a a threat that grows worse every turn with unnoticed, or more of an immediate threat if you have hurry wards. So either way, either one of his traits it's a threat, and it just dishes out constant damage if you don't deal with it. So it's definitely in the higher tiers, but because of there's more mentals around, we're gonna put it in B plus instead of A this time around. Rolder. So some of you know I was experimenting with Rolder for a long time, so I feel like I can adequately say that it belongs in B minus, and that it's probably right alongside these, so it makes sense. Rolder's main gimmick is Tardy Rush. Stays on the board 3 turns, gains a huge speed buff and a slight attack buff. So if you can get your Rolder to survive for those 3 turns to get it off, then it usually gets a ton of value, or it's out of stamina, maybe both. But it's not quite there. It either needs like a stamina buff or a cheaper earth move like Clay Ball, or just a slightly higher attack boost on Tardy Rush and speed boost, because when I was playing it, I found that I just didn't have enough TVs to quite reach the either survivability I need to survive 3 turns, the stamina to get effectively a 4-turn rotation off, I didn't have enough damage to kill something, or I didn't have enough speed after Tardy Rush procced. So it's just all around, I could have used like 80 more TVs. So it either needs some stats or something that can enable it just a little bit better. That would have been great. And so that's why I'm placing it just below B minus. For in general, there's going to be another Earth or neutral that can fill its role. But if you do have a team that really prides itself on survivability, then Rolder may be the play. Next we got Nagais. Nagais is either B or B plus. Like Decidora, after becoming infinite when it's on the field, is super valuable. But the thing is that most of the priority Tems that Naga was really good at countering, stuff like Volfi Plague and Sludge Gifts. And oh come on, what was the other one? There was one other big one that got nerfed. Oh, Hedgen. Hedgen actually losing. Gotta go fast this patch, so that now its harmful microwaves is only 2 prio. It means that it actually becomes a counter to Nagais rather than the other way around, which is a lot tougher for it. And so I'm probably going to leave it in B tier for that reason. It's got its niche like all the ones in B minus, but it actually does it really well. The whole speed control or priority control thing can change games entirely. And you'll probably find yourself banning Nagais a lot more than you'd expect if you have a faster team. I mean, against slower teams, it doesn't matter as much, but then you have Hypno to control, and it's still a threat that cannot be ignored. It's just that, the prevalence of the toxic type, and also its loss of viability of some, and even the prevalence of Digis and Electro Punch. Ragnit, I've seen more use of this patch than any other patch, and Electro Punch on a Tem like Ragnit with enough speed to outspeed Nagais is absolutely relevant. Next up, we got Nidrasil. Nidrasil's A, absolutely. I don't know why this thing has passed so many patches without getting nerfed. It is a fantastic bruiser because one, it's got a great defensive type. It's only weak to fire and wind. And even then, you can't really pivot into it because it will poison you. Like allergic spread on a bruiser does 75% true damage on a single turn, effectively. Spores costing pretty much 0 stamina and also healing or dealing offensive damage is crazy value. Its stats are nuts. Everything about this Tem is just above the curve right now, and I just think it needs to get hit. You could just nerf it by at least removing the healing turns of regen from Tri-Apothecary down to 2 instead of 3. I think that would be a good start. I think it could even care to lose like Toxic Ink, so that if it's going to click an offensive move, it has to click Nox Bomb, and if it wants to click a poison move, then it has to click Spores on your opponent or Allergic Spread. Just it's too efficient. It even has self-healing with cooperation and then buffing with Bark Shield. I mean, it doesn't do much at all for fast teams, and Tri-Phytologist, as much as they try and make it work, is probably... I mean, Tri-Apothecary is probably around B tier. Or sorry, Tri-Phytologist is probably around B tier. Tri-Apothecary is the one that makes it ridiculously strong. So I'm putting it in A tier, undisputably. If there was an A+ tier, I'd probably put Nidrasil in there. I know some people don't think Nidrasil's as bad as other Toxics, but in my personal experience, that's what I think. So... But it's just A tier, okay? We're not splitting it up. It's A tier. Kapire didn't get a whole lot of changes. It's gotten a lot of stat buffs over the previous patches. This patch, all it got was a new trait in Ignite Protection, which is currently bugged and can't be adequately tested. But it's really weird to have a defensive trait like that on a Tem like Kapire that wants to be a fast sweeper. For reference, Kapire did lose the new Resilience for the new trait, so it still has Last Rush. New Resilient on Kapire would have been crazy. But the thing with Kapire is it's a monotype, and even though it hits really hard, like Kapire, even at the end of last patch, was starting to see some momentum in its favor from players like, I think it was Lulu was trying it, but Raiken kind of just outshines it right now in a lot of ways. And the new trait just doesn't help it all that much. Kapire's not in that bad of a spot. You get a heat up off and it's still super threatening. And now that we have turn 1 Bamboozle back, it is a better partner for something like Valiart that can protect it turn 1 and to get that heat up off. But I just don't think I can put it higher than B. It's not splashable. You have to play it with neutrals. Neutrals now being countered by or more mentals means it's harder to run neutrals. So I think B- will just be alright for it. So we got Zenarith. Zenarith got Crystal Tail this patch. And it feels pretty good. It's good damage for cheap, and it allows you to run something that's not a stamina item on Zenarith, so in its own right that's valuable. But its physical set in general is weaker. But for slower paced teams that want to play Wrecked Farewell, not having to invest a whole lot of stamina in order to get an attack off is nice, because then you can keep getting your Quartz Shield, Crystal Tail, and maybe like a Sharpening Scaling move off just to kind of do whatever. It's really flexible on what it wants to do, but I don't think it really changes its tier much. It's still a mono crystal. Instead of just spamming Crystal Spikes, now it has the option of just spamming Crystal Tail. And you're really kind of just trading off the high expense or high stamina cost item, or the Invigor, like a Fake Beard or something, for a Slingshot. But in the end, you're still just clicking an attacking move. So it kind of depends on how long Zenarith wants to stay on the board and how many attack moves it wants to click. So for the Zenariths that are really focused on longevity, then Crystal Tail helps some. But for like a general player and just the Tem, I can't say that Zenarith has risen in tiers at all. Actually, I don't even know what I had it at before, but I think it's a solid B tier. I don't think it's above that. It has enough counters, and it does its niche well. On both traits, it's strong. And it's got the highest stat total in the game. The thing's kind of just a ball of stats, but it's just not overwhelming. Auhi. So Auhi finally got something for it. It finally got Phantom Whiplash, which is a 2-hold special attack mental move that does a ton of damage and is probably above the curve a little bit in terms of moves. But because of that, I would put Auhi in B+ tier. Like, this is kind of like one of the mentals that saw such a huge buff this patch. Because Auhi's special attack stat is pretty nuts. It's one of the higher ones in the game, and its offensive typing cannot be resisted. It has perfect coverage, so it's very strong that way. It's got a ridiculously strong trait. All it needed was some sort of damage on the mental side, and now it has it. Only reason I'm not putting it higher is because the thing is still super squishy, and its defensive typing is terrible. So if it can't get the kill to proc Ignis, then it's going to struggle a little bit, and it doesn't have a good mental move turn 1, or even really turn 2. You're kind of playing around holds with it, but it is flexible enough and has options of sleep with Jinx Whisper and Hypno. that it usually doesn't struggle too bad to get those off. I think this one needs to be experimented with a little bit more, but I could see Auhi being super viable from here on, and most Auhis you see will probably be special. Maybe not all, but I would assume most of them are going to be special from here on, so maybe watch out for that. Babua. So there was an item that was mentioned was going to be introduced, the straw shield. Now that one, first of all, they reworked it from what it was going to be in, or what it was in Draft Arena. So now it halves the damage you take from the first 4x move you would take. So I'm trying to think of Tems that could viably use that, and I think Babua would be one of them. Because another thing that happened was the Aquastone buff. So Aquastone's a real move now. It's actually very strong, especially with synergy. And Babua can run it and not be forced into Schween's Horn Toxic Slime all the time. And then you could swap the item to Straw Shield. However, Straw Shield is bugged and not in the game, so we can't even test it. So I can't really base anything off of that. So keep that in mind for any other 4Xs that I already did or haven't done yet. But Babua is just kind of... I think it's a solid B tier. It does get walled by Toxics, which are some of the most common top tiers in the game. But it does have a solid trait. It does pretty much everything it wants to do offensively. It has a decent stat spread. It has cheese combos with it. It does what it wants to do. It doesn't quite excel, but it doesn't get completely ruined either. So I think it's just solid where it's at. Obi. So Obi didn't get any changes this patch, but the Bamboozle change makes it so that you can get a little bit more value with it with Bamboozle users because of either target rep or source rep. I know I've done a lot of target rep shenanigans with Bamboozle in the past, but I don't think that Obi is anything higher than B right now. Obi. That was not intentional, and that's awful. Okay, so let's forget that. So, Obi, one of its better partners previously was Shaolance with Welcomer, because you had the potential to lead Source Rep Obi with Welcomer Shaolance, and then both Tempt would start the game with Evasion. And it would be a pretty big threat, just because your opponent basically gets 2 turns of free damage on you. But Welcomer got reworked, and so that's not a possibility anymore. So Obi lost that combo, but like I said, it gained the Bamboozle one. But even then, it's always just going to be a support. So I can't place it super high. There was also the Binary Flood nerf, which happened like in the 1.5.1 or 2. That made it so that one of its better offensive options got hit. So that definitely holds it into a support even more. It'll be a little bit niche in its support role, but I think it does it just fine. Does everything it wants to well, but it doesn't quite excel. I can't put it in B+ or higher. So I think it's in a good spot, though. I think it is. Saku. I don't think Saku got anything this patch, but it didn't need it. Saku's kind of in the same spot as Lawali. Great type. It's just if you want to bulk your Lawali. It's already got Petal Dagger for turn 1 nature. It's got good traits either way. Some people were actually using Air Specialist Debris Typhoon combos with Saku to just destroy top tier toxic types. It was kind of fun to see for a little bit because it's basically the hardest hitting wind in the game that's not named Barnshi. At least I think so. But being weak to toxic makes it kind of hurt too. But it's alright. It's in a good spot. It has healing with Lifeful Step. It has coverage with Narco Hit, and even Nox Bomb you'll see once in a great while. It can function on a couple different archetypes, so just bulky offense, or even some stall variants as a healer with Kaleidoscope, Lifeful Step. Or even just like it being a raid boss receiver. So it's good, it's not super great. B tier is good. Flash. Flash, I think, is fine. Scavenger is quite strong, and now that more mentals are around, having a crystal is valuable, and having a neutral that's not weak to mental is special in its own right. Jack of all trades still feels a bit underpowered, but just a Madness buff set after the Madness buff down to a 25% health loss, it still can click the move and pop off as long as your opponent doesn't have any huge crystal counters. And it can heal off the damage of Scavenger. And with games being faster paced rather than slower, just being able to get free healing from dealing damage, which is exactly what you want to do anyways, is strong. But its defensive typing, offensive typing just isn't great. So I'm not putting it any higher than B. Yeah, it's still typically a special set that's run. Physical set isn't all that used, just because you lack the priority that Crystal Spikes offers. But it's not a bad Tem by any means. Alhi, I'm probably going to put in C. I think I put it in C before too. It's not bad. They've tried some stuff. They tried giving a Furor. They tried giving a Telekinetic Shrapnel. None of those things have done anything for it. It's still just another wind and melee option, but nowadays with one of Digi's bigger counters getting nerfed and Digi's and Electrics just roaming everywhere, and even mental viability, it's hard to put it anywhere higher than C. So its defensive typing is bad. It does what it wants to offensively, I think. Just hard-hitting melee nuker. It does that good. And it has priority wind moves with Turbine, and it can click Feather Gatling for a turn 1 as well. So it has options. It just doesn't excel at them. And it's not really a Tem you want to run in this meta. But I'm not putting it in D tier because it's not like it's awful. It's just, I think if we saw a slower paced meta, that Alti could really come out as a higher performer. Probably not anything above B+. But Wind is just valuable enough as a typing, and it's so strong on the melee side that it can be threat. Then we got Barnshee. Barnshee I'm going to put in the same spot. I think Barnshee needed the Phantom Whiplash move as well, and I'm surprised to see that it didn't get it. Barnshee's moves are so expensive and its stamina stat is so low that even after all the stat buffs it got defensively and even a little bit too stam, it can't quite survive 3 turns unless you're facing a pure special team. It's like Barnshee's a good special wall nowadays, but it doesn't do enough damage to outpace a whole lot of stuff. And even if it can do enough damage, it usually just runs out of steam real quick because it just doesn't have enough stamina. So it seems Barnshee's kind of struggles everywhere. It's not really great for its typing. Its offensive typing is great. Defensively, it's terrible. It's just you're gonna find yourself struggling more often than not. And the fact that once again, Digis and Electrics are so common that you're gonna struggle to find a game where you really want to take Barnshee. Though it is good at countering Toxics. That's kind of why I'm putting it in C instead of D. Being immune to poison ticks with neutrality is valuable, for sure. And even like Mom's Lunch if you want to run that for something goofy. Next we got Gyalis. Gyalis hasn't seen a whole lot of play lately, but it's not bad by any means. I just think people are choosing other crystals right now, mainly Chimerian, and having a crystal that's not weak to Digi, because crystal is one of the best types to bring against Digi teams, is probably the reason why we don't see a whole lot of Gyalis. But it's not like you don't see it. It does its job well. It's a strong, hard-hitting, relatively bulky and fast Tem. Just depends on how you want to run it. Doesn't have any natural offensive scaling or support options though, so it kind of just smacks stuff, and that's how it goes. So I think B tier is fine for it. Nothing crazy, nothing bad. I think they finally found a good spot for Gyalis after all the time where it was top tier. So gonna leave it there. We got Mix. Mix is gonna go right next to Auhi in B+ tier, as it was one of the other Tems that received Phantom Whiplash that really gave it a boost in power. Because Mix fell off for a long time because the general power of spread moves got raised, and so a lot of Tems were running them. And Mix doesn't like spread moves because of Puppet Master. Oh dang, I got a lot left. It doesn't like spread moves, so people were just like, well, I can't even use its trait viably. But its trait still does pose a threat, and so now not only do you still have to deal with Mix's trait, but it also has great offensive options. It has a mental move that actually deals damage and isn't low prio. Because otherwise it was Emanip, which doesn't do damage, or Psy Surge and Denigrate, which are too slow. So it's very flexible and definitely something to be scared of nowadays. Just because Crystal Spikes is already high prio, refresh to get higher damage boosts off, play around its trait. Yeah, the thing's real threatening. I don't think it's going to be an A tier though, because its defensive typing is still bad, and it doesn't have the highest speed stat around. And if your opponent does still have spread moves, if like ample spread moves, just still deletes mix. Like, oh, you've got 3 Rockfall users, an Electric Storm, and an Allergic Spread. Well, I don't even know if I want to bring mix. You never know, but that's kind of the only thing keeping mix in B+ is its glaring weaknesses, even though it's got its good strengths now. Raiken. Ooh, I almost want to put Raiken in B+. I am so tempted. There's a lot of Raiken believers out there right now, and Rush going back down to 0 hold helps it significantly, especially against all the resilient abusers. But I think I'm gonna leave it in B. It's higher than Kapire. It's the better fire monotype right now because the free on-tempo scaling with Prideful, and then the higher just general bulk that Raiken has is super strong. It combos well Meteor Swarm with Nagais, and then, like I said, you got Rush to just take out a low health target and gain Prideful at the same time. But, you know, it's once again, it's a mono fire. It's only coverage being held anger. I mean, you're not going to click Rampage or Stampede. So it's really just held anger. It's just on 3 hold. So it has clear weaknesses, but in teams that don't have adequate counters to a Raiken, it can really run through a team. So it's something to be scared of. I think it's at a good power level right now. I wouldn't change it at all, and that's why I think it belongs in B. Iranians. Man, why's my buddy gotta get nothing at all? I guess I should probably put Pookie in S tier. I like Pookie tier. Hold on, let me make a new. Add row above. Yep, and then we'll make it ocean blue. It's not ocean blue, but it's a different blue. We got Pookie tier. Because I got questions about it last time. Pookie is my mascot, that's why he's in Pookie tier. He's not good. He's not good. It's a pre-evo and it's just a joke, but people thought that he was actually like top tier and wanted to know why. He's not. He's got one of the second lowest stat totals in the entire game. But he's my favorite little guy. So, but Piranha, getting back to that. So, Piranha's received a lot of changes. You'd think it's good, but Piranha has really always struggled. Because it's the viability of Piranha is kind of based on what your opponent does, because it cannot proc energy reserves on its own reasonably. So if you just ignore Piranha, it's not a threat because you'll never have to worry about energy reserves, and it can't do anything to really scare you off. Its only control option is freeze, and it's got to be 2 cold geysers, and it's got to be faster, or like a fast ice cubes. It can kind of exhaust with ultrasound if you're running that, and kind of lower defenses with humiliating slap, but really Piranha is very ignorable. And if you leave a Piranha to the end game and just wait for it to run out of stamina, it doesn't do a whole lot at all. And it just, anything that it's designed to do, like, it's like a really weirdly designed aggressive support, and that's just not a niche that it fits the niche all right. It's not a niche that's even needed in the game, I don't think. It's hard to make something viable like that. It's just 2 completely opposite playstyles. You want something that deals a lot of damage and something that doesn't even click damaging moves, and you got it in the same Tem, and that's what Piranha is. So it's just kind of a weird design. And so it usually floats around C or D tier. I don't think I've put it anywhere above that since I came back to the game 2 years ago, 2.5, and so it's just gonna be C tier. Sorry, bud. Scaravolt. Scaravolt's kind of tempting to put in B+. I think we're gonna put it in B tier. Ever since Half Full got +2 special attack back. It's been a really good raid boss candidate. You just pair it next to like a Kaleidoscope Rifle Sap user or Yggdrasil, and it's a big offensive threat while also being super tanky. But it has a definite weakness in Earth types. The thing is that Earth types aren't all that common. It's also weak to control because if you're running half full, you're not gonna have, or you're gonna be running Baton Pass. You won't have any of the CC avoiding items, so you can sleep it, you can poison it. It's very vulnerable to poison ticks. You can use evasion. So it's got defined weaknesses, but I wouldn't change it at all. I think it's finally in a good spot for a Tem with that many weaknesses. I think it's just good where it's at. So let's leave it there. Hedgen got hit so bad. So the big change to Hedgen is that gotta go fast no longer gives priority to 0 hold options. So harmful microwaves does not have priority unless you have synergy. And plasma beam for that matter. So Hedgen's kind of fallen to either be like a fire prio machine, which isn't really all that needed when you can have like Quetzal or Fiery Soul users, or a Zen med with prio sort of user, but it's kind of weird to have your Hedgen just be a support. Oh, also Generify. Generify also is a turn 1 option that no longer has prio. So that niche that Hedgen had is gone. I think in terms of digis, it's definitely below the curve now. It doesn't have the stats to survive super well. Maybe people will come back and try and use it as more of a support, but even it doesn't have any offensive threat, so maybe it's ignorable now. I don't know. I think people got to experiment with it more, but nobody even wants to touch it because that nerf was really harsh. I'm just going to leave it in B-. I think it's below the curve right now. I think this is the lowest I've ever seen Hedgen. I could be proven wrong. That one I could be proven wrong, but I don't think Hedgen's in a good spot right now. I think if you're going to run a Digi, you're going to look at something else. So that's why it's in B- tier. And Fire is same thing. You're going to run a different Fire if that's what you want. The only reason you would run it is maybe for that fast Zen med. And that's why, it's with the other Tems that do have a niche, but it's so niche that it's just not that great. Next up, we got Osakai. Osakai started seeing some use in Worlds, which is cool. It's really good once you get a turbo off. It was always kind of crippled ever since it lost the slingshot speed boost with Hook, so it can no longer raise its speed and attack in the same turn. But now it has... I mean, it's not like now it has something, but ever since it got Inner Spirit, it's a huge nuke, so you can Hook, get +2 attack, then smack something with a hard-hitting Dust Vortex and an even harder-hitting Inner Spirit. But its defensive type chart sucks, so you kind of got to run Reactive Vial on it to even survive more than one hit. And then you have to have some sort of speed control on your team to allow it to go before other stuff. So I just because of its defined weaknesses and like its typing, its speed, and limited prio, I think it's going to be in B. But it's not weak by any means. And as far as scaling threats, now that Tireless got hit, Osakai is still up there, and I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing it again more often. But more mentals around kind of hurts, so who knows? It's kind of just a prediction, but I think it's pretty balanced right now. I wouldn't change it at all, so B tier it is. Next we got Saipat. I like Saipat. I kind of end up putting Saipat in B+ a lot. It's a little bit over the curve in terms of stats, like base stats. It's got so many defensive, offensive, and speed options. There's so much in all of those stats that it can survive, be faster than you, and deal damage. It does have a ton of weaknesses though, so that's what kind of balances it out. But also, Saipat has lots of prio options to circumvent that a little bit. Makes it a little tough to take out in some situations, and the combination with Amphibian and Fluid Barrier, or even just as a counter to water types, makes it so it's definitely a threat. So I think it's just a little above the curve, but it definitely has counters. That's why I'm not... I mean, I don't think I'd ever put Saipat in A tier. Just because it's a town with, I think it's got 5 weaknesses. It's like nature, electric, digi, toxic, and mental. Yeah, 5 weaknesses. And yes, so it's probably good here. It also doesn't really have a turn 1 melee move, and it relies on an item to have even a turn 1 water move. But I think it's still strong regardless. I think Saipat's a little bit of an outlier in terms of its strength related to its weaknesses. I think even with all those weaknesses, it may still be a little bit strong. Maybe just my opinion, though. It also has a niche on freeze teams worth mentioning. But Drakash. So Drakash really found a home with Digi teams. Digi teams kind of just accept their water weakness, and maybe they'll have like a Platamus, and there's ample electrics to threaten out waters, and just hope that's enough. And they'll just have like 5 or 6 Tems that are weak to water, which is more than I would ever want. But Drakash seems to kind of fit. He can be an Earth that threatens out electrics and threaten out crystals, which is one of Digi types or Digi team's worst counters. So it has that niche. It doesn't really excel, and it's not really used outside of that much. Heat Discharge, still kind of a little goofy of a trait. They reworked the other death traits. I'm kind of wondering when we're going to get one for Heat Discharge, but we don't have it yet. So it still can be useful. I've lost a game due to Heat Discharge before, absolutely. And then Sentinel's still solid. It's not a very splashable Tem. Hard to justify it over Fires and Earths in most cases. But in Digis, it does have a home. So that's why I'm putting it in B- this time and not C. Tortonite got so many flipping stats. It's definitely above the curve, 100%. I don't know why they overloaded it with stats. Like, they gave it a ton of stats one patch, and they gave it a ton more the next patch. I think they gave it like 30 stats over 1.5.1 and 2. I don't. That's a number, but I think it was around that much, and it was like all bulk stats. So they haven't nerfed Crystal Deluge yet, so you can spend the TVs to invest in speed on Tortonite because it's already naturally bulky now. It has a high special attack stat as is, can sleep you with Crystal Deluge, and then it can also just Quartz Shield up a couple times, and all of a sudden you can't kill it. So even with all of its weaknesses, it's on the slower side, but it has enough prio options that it doesn't matter. And offensively, it can threaten so many types, even though defensively it kind of struggles. And it walls Toxics, which are one of the most prevalent types in the game, so that's also relevant. Like, completely walls them because of the 4x resist, and he can't be poisoned. He's like the best pivot to take a crystal or a Toxic attack. And then you just play it on a slower team. 1 Quartz Shield on himself when he's full health can just flip a game, or on something else for that matter. And it's not like he's a threat after it's gone either. So I think Tortonite's too strong. I don't think I'm not going to put it in A tier, though, just because it's speed. If it doesn't have mental partners, it's not as good. And it's also got a lot of weaknesses, kind of like Saipat. That putting it in A tier would honestly be a little weird, just because it's so weak to so many types. You could, like, the best way to deal with a Tortonite is probably to take out all of its allies first, if you can do that without incurring too many losses. And then just forcing a 1v like 3 at the end of a game. Can't say that for sure though, but Tortonite's definitely strong. Almost like better Zenith, honestly. Alright, we got Inky. So Special Inky's always been good. And now, well, for a long time Special Inky's been good. And now Physical Inky got Slingshot, so that Sparkling Bullet does solid damage, even if it doesn't have synergy. So now Physical Inky is a consideration over Special Inky. I think it's still probably most people are going to opt for Special Inky, but you know, the fact that it's even an option now is good. I think Inky's just a solid B+ though. Having that much power in a single Tem with Spec Master or Fizz Master just makes it so strong as a glass cannon, and that I think it performs its role well enough. And because they pumped enough defensive stats in it, it usually doesn't even die to a single 2x attack. Like, you can live a Fiery Soul, some Lava Waves, maybe even some Soul Shouts with a little bit of health. You have Prio on your special set with DC Beam for some reason, Evasion with Bright Beam if you want it, and then the physical set has stronger options with like Paizo and Mineral Hail. I think Inky's just a solid B+. Lots of high damage options. Shellance probably the second biggest loser of the patch. Maybe third. I guess it's all kind of a competition between Shellant, Hedgen, and Mawala. Shellant with the Welcomer nerf really got rid of Shellant's one niche. It has all the support moves that it wants, which is still very strong. But it's not able to enable anything nearly as well. It doesn't have that one free turn. So you'd really only be running it if you really want a Kesugatame user. Or maybe you can swap something into the other slot and then set it up. So maybe it can get a sharpening off easier on a Chimerian or something. Something that has a hold naturally. There you'd want the evasion on the second turn instead of the first turn. Which I think is just kind of weird. Because you can already use High Toe to prevent attempt from attacking on the second turn anyways. So it's tough. I know they just did that for consistency reasons. People can predict it, but it kind of kills the Tem in my opinion. Bruiser Shellant already saw next to no use. I'm just putting in C tier though because even though it's bad, it does have good support options, and it's not like Welcomer is completely dead. It can still be a turn of evasion. It's just got to wait a turn, and Shellant has enough bulk, and it can usually take that hit. So I think we'll just leave it in C. Cycrox. I'm just gonna leave it in B tier. Cycrox, click Doom. That's what Cycrox does. It buffed Water Synthesizer. Does absolutely nothing for it. Neurotoxins didn't see any change. It's just Cycrox. It dooms, it strangles. After that, it's pretty much just useless, but it's tanky enough to do what it wants. It's just not an interesting enough Tem for me to even talk about it more. Pocus, on the other hand, yeah, no, Pocus isn't that interesting either. Pocus just clicks slow down. It really just finds its home in mental cores, which you'd think, oh, now that more mentals are viable, then Pocus is more viable. Well, not really. If anything, Pocus, or more mentals being viable means Pocus is less viable because there's more things to be immune to sleep. Because those mental cores that Pocus usually plays on are the control teams with Lowaddle and Gallios and Tortonite and stuff. So it still has that, and boy oh boy is it a pain to face a team like that if you don't have adequate counters. But that's about all it does. It can still kind of nuke things with Gamma Burst, but most people just run Fat Burner for the extra speed, and so it doesn't even matter anyways. So we're just going to leave it here. Yeah, it's also kind of competing with Valiar now. The Valiar's viable again. Golzy. Golzy's probably also going to be in B tier. It's because... And Golzy's always either strong or weak because its typing just makes it so that it's weak to a lot of things, but it can hit like every single one of its weaknesses for super effective damage. It's really weird. So if it can outspeed, it's super threatening. If it can't, then it's not. It has Prio with Hasty Lunge, which is nice, but thing is, there's so many Crystal Spikers, and now with Prio Phantom Whiplash around, you have to play around a lot more to get your stuff off with Golzy. Plus, just the general bulk level means that if you aren't hitting super effective, then you're probably not doing a whole lot. But also disabling items is good. Yeah, I think there's an argument for B+, but I think I'm going to leave it in B. God, it's tough, It's also kind of nice against Digi-Teams, which Digi-Teams are a bit more prevalent nowadays. Because it can take one microwaves and then hit back with a Hasty Lunge. But I suppose it's probably a situation where both don't die. The Digi doesn't die and also Golzy doesn't die. But then Golzy gets outsped next turn and dies to the harmful, so I'm going to leave it in B. Golzy's really good at punishing slow teams also, and is a potential for Slingshot with Sparkling Bullet, but I think that it wants Adrenaline Shot for Hasty Lunge far more often. Oh, I am not getting through these very fast. I'm sorry. I hope you guys are enjoying like a little bit of a longer video. If not, I hope you're just skipping through and finding the ones you want to hear. So Mashuk. So Mashuk is kind of interesting. They changed Tireless. I'm not going to say nerfed. I'm not going to say buffed. They changed Tireless. It was adjusted, you know. So what they did is instead of gaining +2 attack when you overexert, you only gain +1 attack, but the overexertion damage you take is halved. Actually, I'm lying. We're gonna put it in B+. So some people say yes, that's a nerf. Other people say no, that's a buff. I think it's just kind of about equal. It's just a little bit different. So rather than being a faster scaling threat, Mashuk is just something where the longer you leave it alone, the more it becomes a threat. Kind of along the same lines of Rolder, but Mashuk has a much better defensive type and more options available to it, with Turbo to create the speed boost, and you know it can raise its attack on tempo and infinitely pretty much. So the reason I'm kind of putting it in B+ is one, everything that Mashuk wants to do right now, Tataru does better. I think that once Tataru gets, or Resilient gets hit and Tataru falls, then Mashuk may rise back up to A tier, but for now I think it's going to be in B+. Also, the rise of a couple mentals also puts a damper on melees wanting to play the game. But it's, like, Toxic is still an extremely strong type. Parrier also got a buff for that set too. I don't know if I'd put Parrier Mashuk in B+, but it is still very nice. Having a turbo on a Tem that's not wind combos well with winds and is toxic, which is the type you want anyways. It does all combos to be a very strong Tem, but I am only really putting it in B+ because of the whole Tataru thing and mentals. I think that 1.6.1 you probably just put Mashuk back up in A tier. I just don't think the nerf or the adjustment really hit it all that bad. I think most of the time your +2 attack, wastewater isn't going to change anything anyways. It's still probably going to be a 2-hit KO on most things as is. But now you have more staying power. You can't just exhaust a Mashuk to kill it or ignore it until it just dies. You have to pretty much hit it to finish it off. Bastion. Ooh, Bastion was one of the bigger winners of the patch with the Aquastone buff. I love the Aquastone buff. And Bastion's definitely the Tem that got the benefit the most from it. Pyro Bastion specifically. Makes it so you're not completely holden to Water Blade on the Solidifier set. So I tried Bastion quite a few times, and it feels good to click Aquastone, but it's a bit on the slower end, like Bastion is. And you need synergy to get that big damage boost off. And if you're hitting a neutral hit, most of the time you still probably just want to click Lava Wave for the Pyromaniac boost. But it definitely makes it a real consideration for both fires and waters, just whatever you want it for. Its typing is very strong. It's only got 2 weaknesses, electric and toxic. Unfortunately, toxic is one of the most common, and electric is common with Digi teams, and if you want a water to beat Digis, it ain't going to be Bastion. I think if it wasn't for the prevalence of Digis and toxics, the Bastion would be higher, but that's kind of just a given based on its defensive typing. But it's definitely something to consider. I like Bastion a lot, but I can't put it higher than B tier. But I mean, it's definitely not. It's not over the curve. It's not under the curve. It's in the right spot. B tier fits for it. Ukama. Honestly, just B tier. I was considering B-, but it's just like there's enough toxics around. You can still get water cannon synergy whenever you feel like it. It deserves to be higher than Whip Lump in my opinion, just because you don't die in one hit to an electric. Also, Ukama's got Prio with Aquatic Whirlwind. But and now that Oshiara lost Water Blade, it's more of a consideration to pick Ukama over Oshiara. I haven't seen a lot of people returning to it yet, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it as the patch develops a little bit more. So I'm going to leave it in B tier. I think Ukama's fine. Doesn't need any changes. Ragnit. Ragnit's so interesting. Because Ragnit as a standalone Tem is probably just in B tier. It's got so many support options. And it's got a great supportive trait, a good offensive trait. I mean, kinetic transfer is kind of good offensive because you can just click offensive moves whenever. And then it synergizes so well with just digitals in general, like so well. But if you're not playing it next to digitals, it is a little lackluster. So I have a hard time putting it as an individual tem in B. It's not, but I mean it's relatively splashable. It's got hypnosis. It can be a support on other teams. Piezo for prio outside of electro punch, ultrasound for more support options. It's got so much going for it. But it is a mono electric, and it does rely heavily on its partners rather than doing anything itself. It's not like an enabler. I mean, it does have P-Jab. It can kind of be whatever you want. It's like one of your Swiss Army knife Tems. I'm going to leave it in B. Might be a bit controversial, but I think B is good. Definitely not lower than that. If anything, it would be a bit higher, just because of how the meta's gone. I've seen a lot of people using it. It's got stats. It's got so much going for it. But I'm going to put it in B just because it's a standalone Tem. It just doesn't feel better than that. Size Munch. Size Munch is a Tem I really don't see all that often. It's good on melee cores, and that's kind of all it's been for a long time, but it used to have enough power that melee cores were built around Size Munch. But there's just so many other better options right now. The Size Munch isn't a real consideration for most teams. And now it lost Shaolant, which is its pretty much only remaining like free setup partner. You have Bamboozle, but the thing was with Shaolant and before that Mawala with Hypnotist is that you had Synergy on turn 2. And you were still able to click a move because he was already swapped in. And that was really nice and valuable. Now you don't have that. So if anything, Size Munch probably dropped from B to B- because of the Shaolant change. Because now you're forced to Bamboozle and then swap, and then it's just chances are you're not going to kill something, and it's just tough. I don't think Size Munch is in the best spot right now. I think it could use a bit of a larger rework to make it so it's not just monkey click Size Munch wreck and after heat up, and that's kind of all it does right now. So it would be nice to see it do something else. We got Zyzer. I mean, I was talking with some of the top players. I think Zyzer needs one of two directions. Either one, it needs a relatively large speed boost, so it can get more value with Rockfall burns, piercing wheel speed value, faster Jinx Whisper, stuff like that. Or it needs Narco Hit for some amount of coverage. But there's kind of like disagreement on which one is the better one to go with. But in its current state, Zyzer it's just an Earth Nuker, which is kind of interesting in its own right. But it's slow. It can very easily die before it even gets the hit off. And if you want Electric Custodian with its other trait, you're going to run Ragnet. So it needs some help. It does. It's on the list of Tems that need help, and that's kind of everything in C and below. But because it does have the one Earth niche, we'll leave it in C instead of D. Earth Nuker. Gorong. Gorong is the other Tem that got kind of benefited by the Tireless change, but it also got the Rush change, where it rushes back to 0 hold, and it can click a turn 1, and it combos with Tireless. So, yeah, I mean, I haven't seen enough Gorongs around. It's pretty much, I feel like it's just in the same spot as last patch, though. It's a good raid boss. It's something to be threatening, but it's still a melee, mono melee. So it can get walled, and now with more mentals around, I'm just going to leave it in B tier. It's also very vulnerable to control. Sandbee. Sandbee's probably just, it's still in B tier. It's still a solid mental. If you just need some strong physical mental damage, Sandbee's probably your go-to. But it does get outclassed by a couple other mentals with like Auhi and Mix now. Where even Gallios is kind of an alternative you could run for Sandbee. So it's not as strong as it used to be, but I don't even know if Sandbee was ever all that strong, but more that it was just more consistent than other melees. And now that other or other mentals. Now that other mentals have that consistency, Sandby is pretty much just average, which is a fine spot for it, but it's just not higher than B. Momo. Momo's B+. It's still just... Momo just destroys any slower teams. Stabmaster, Refresh, with the tanky stats it has, just makes it extremely threatening. But, you know, no prio on it. Being a mono neutral. B+ is just going to be a good spot for it. Same thing as the mentals. Like, you'd be surprised. Like, the mentals gaining popularity has really changed a lot. I'll probably just touch on that at the end, though, if I remember. Karen. No, I mean, I think I put Karen in B+ before because it was such a good stall enabler. Because it has, like, the most loaded stall kit in the game. Anything you'd want in a stall tem, Karen is and has. And it still does, but I feel like stall really hasn't gotten a whole lot of love. You kind of got the defensive buffs for Tortonite, and even if you call it the Crystal Tail, a buff for stall Zeno. But in general, I gotta say that Karen's probably just B. It's at a good spot. I wouldn't change it at all. Still has all those tools available to it. Offensive set's even there if you want to. But it's not great. Cerneef, C for Cerneef, right? Cerneef doesn't really have anything it does unique. It's got settling. It just kind of sits there. It's probably one step above Taifu as like a nature raid boss. That's why I'm putting it in C instead of D. Because you can't ignore a Cerneef. You can almost ignore a Taifu. Cerneef has Bush and the higher natural speed stat. So water cutting can actually outspeed a few things if you got synergy on it. And then even Colossity is a good trade if you're not running settling. You got Revitalize for more consistent healing, Gaia for stamina sustain. It did definitely get hurt by the Sweatband nerf from a couple patches ago, and it's never quite recovered from that. And there's also all of the prevalence of Toxics and even some Fires gaining momentum that it's hard for me to put it higher than C. I think it would just be cool if Cerneef got something a little more interesting rather than the Tem that sits there. But that's just me. Axolotl. This one's just going to go in B-. Well, it's really the same as Grandpa. It has that niche of Turbo and Hypno, but it's competing with every other Toxic for a spot on the team. So, I mean, it's got the whole Madness buff thing too. Madness buff Trance to wall special teams, but a good team will have balanced like offensive types, so that you'll see it'll be hard to pull off, and you also have to survive that initial onslaught, which can be tough. And then your moveset's also going to struggle. If you're going the Madness buff set, then you don't have the supportive options of either Hypno or Turbo, maybe even both. So you kind of got to choose which one you want for it. So it's got tools, but it doesn't excel at anything. It's just kind of below average at everything it wants to do, and that's why it's just B-. Because it has the options, it just doesn't excel at anything, really. Also, the Toxic Skin change hurt it quite a bit, because like when Toxic Skin got buffed, it really helped Nox, but it helped Doro a lot more. And now that it's back to the state it's currently in, it's just like Nox still doesn't really run it. Still usually runs Trance. Guldur. Guldur's finally out of D tier, everyone. Could it be back in D tier? Yeah, but it's got Infectious now, which is pretty much the only relevant change to it. So it has that niche of stopping healing. Biggest problem is that it stops all healing, including healing on your side. So you cannot heal Guldur, you can't run Refreshing Diabolo on it, or Nut Bar. Guldur, because it has the highest HP in the game, gets the most value out of healing on itself. And so it's really anti-synergy for Guldur itself, but it does have a niche that no other temp in the game covers. It's just so niche, and really hardly functions outside of that niche, besides like toxic tick spreading. That I think I'm gonna put it in C. And I mean, Senior Plat used it in Worlds and had a lot of success, so it's not like Gulder's absolute garbage. I think part of it's just due to the strength of Toxic as a type in Poison Ticks, and also the fact that Plat can probably play just about everything and have success. He also played Volcrane. But I don't think Gulder is any higher than C. I think most other Toxics do everything Gulder wants to do better. Although Bamboozle is backed on 0 hold for at least the first turn. So you could try and do something there, but ever since the Decidora changed, Gulder kind of lost that very specific niche. And if you're going to run a Bamboozle usually you're probably running Valiar. But, you know, maybe things will change and Gulder will see a bit more use. So it's just Bamboozle and Infectious are two things that make me rise Gulder from D to C. Volarend's A tier. Oh, look at that. We have 3 toxic types in A tier. Very interesting. Yeah, so Volarend's defensive typing is just crazy. It counters so many Tems. It completely walls Platamus and Nidrisil, because it resists Earth, Nature, Water, and Toxic. 4 types, while only having 1 weakness as well. So you'll get common threats like Platamus and Nidrisil. You'll also have stuff like Volphy and even Acronox that it completely walls. And then the mono waters and stuff too. On top of Volarend not being a complete liability on its own, it has beef up, so for scaling its physical set, as well as a trait that just raises its special defense every time it attacks with a toxic move. Or if you want a faster offensive set, it still can raise speed and become the fastest thing on the board in like 1 or 2 turns. At least that one has a trade-off cost. But either way, it's basically Volarend gets so much value from its typing that it doesn't even matter. And it just happens to also have anaerobic, which is a good trait, and consistent high damage options on its physical set and even on its special set. As well as one of the higher special defenses in the game. It's just Volarend's kit is pretty stacked. I'm a little surprised to see it not get hit at all. But I think Volarend's usage would fall off if toxic viability in general went down. Because if Platamus and Nidrisil fell in the tier list, all of a sudden that's 2 big Tems that Volarend all of a sudden isn't useful against anymore. And in most neutral matchups, Volarend isn't nearly as useful as it is in some others. Grumper, I love Grumper. Let's just leave it in B. It's not above the curve, it's not below the curve. It's got a lot of tools, good offensive typing, bad defensive typing. It basically does what it wants to do successfully every game. Gazuma. I'm going to still put Gazuma in A tier. Bite me, alright? It's just... Tesla Prison got nerfed, but the stat nerfs or their stat buffs that Gazuma got still ended up being too much in my opinion. I thought that just the Tesla Prison stam nerf, and maybe there is a stam bug going on right now, where Tems regen more stamina every turn than they're supposed to. So maybe once that gets nerfed, we'll feel the effects of the stamina nerf on Tesla Prison a bit more. But right now, Gazuma is still just able to click so many cheap moves and survive long enough, as long as it's not in the face of a crystal. It's 1 weakness, and still get turbos off. It's the best speed control support in the game, as well as having strong offensive options. And even completely wall the second most common type in the game being wind, because it's a 4x resist. So it's not an S tier. It's definitely not Tataru level. But when you're comparing it to the other A tiers and B tiers, it's definitely above most of the B plus tiers, and I would say it's right alongside the A tiers. Also, just for reference, it's Gazuma's, I think, the only Tem that beats winds and toxics effectively, because it has electric moves to hit winds and then wind moves to hit toxics. So that's also another thing contributing to its viability. Oshiara. So Oshiara was one of the probably 4th place as far as biggest nerf, where it got hit by losing Water Blade. But then Serbatio's got rebuffed, so it's still got a niche as like the highest special attack in the game, as well as scaling that special attack on tempo. So Oshiara has that niche, but now that it lost Prio, it can be easily punished, and with Prio just littered everywhere in the game. So I'm gonna move it to B tier, and I think that's just fine. It's kind of it's definitely an argument on if you want Oshiara or Ukama on the team now, rather than kind of just defaulting to Oshiara every time. Even though they filled different roles, it was just kind of you'd still want Oshiara on most faster teams. But now there's an argument, so I think that's good. I don't think Oshiara's not overpowered anymore. I think it's probably at about the right power level, maybe a bit lower, honestly. Like it could almost go B minus, but I think I'll leave it as is because it does still punish slow teams very well, and that is a good thing for it. Yowler, still such a pain in the butt on stall teams. It's just a raid boss hibernate. If you can't deal with it, you have to control it. I think it's I don't know. It could probably be lower, but I'm gonna put it in B plus. It can wall physical teams so easily with Toughen. The fact that it still has clinch is a little surprising, because Savage Suplex it should have some sort of weakness, and the only weakness the Yowler has is that it can't really hit neutral or mentals, and so there's a couple of mentals around now, so that could almost lower its viability, but I think it lowers it from being a high B plus tier to a low B plus tier. that's about it. That's about it. Gario's also probably B tier. Its trait's still super strong and kind of carries it for being a 4x weak to nature. It has good stab options. And now it's not even hold into gravel bag ever since it got clay ball a few patches back. I think Gario's a pretty well designed Tem. I like it. I still end up using it a lot. It's not overpowered. It's not super weak. It does get walled by Volarin though. So, and like Nidrasil and Platamus. So, like in this specific meta, Gario could almost drop a tier, but because it's so good or it's just so consistent and generally good, I wouldn't put it lower than B. I'm gonna leave it here. Broccolim, I'm also gonna put in B. It's solid. It has good stab options for both of its typings. It's got a crazy good trait. Camouflage is incredible. The only reason Broccolim doesn't see a whole lot more use is because its defensive typing is bad and it's slow, which means it's relatively common for double-ins to be able to take it out. It's just, it can't be a physical double-in because otherwise Camo gives it the ability to survive for the most part. But if you have like a fiery soul into a wastewater, then yeah, no, your Broccolim's not surviving. But you're also why did you stay on that board? So I like Broccolim. I think it's good. It's about at the right spot it should be, I think. Schween. I mean, it's not like Schween itself is super strong. It's the best buff machine in the game because it spits out fluid barriers turn 1, quartz shields turn 2, another fluid barrier, quartz shield. Can poison stuff with water cannon if it needs to do some damage. Pair it with Toxics, since Toxics get so much value out of survivability as well. Also pairs with Tataru because of the whole rage thing. So I mean, Guardian is a very strong trait, preventing status effects, but most of the time you don't see it used outside of the specific combos of like rage, because it doesn't prevent sleep. Prevents like burn and toxic. Maybe you'll get a niche doom prevention, but you can also just put fluid barrier on something and then be immune to status effects that way. So the stat or the trait doesn't get too much value. But I don't know. Schween's all right. It's in a good spot. I wouldn't change anything about it. You just got to change its best partner being Tataru. And maybe Saipat. Like if we were pairing like specific combos, Schween Saipat would still maybe be a bit above the curve, because if you don't have any immediate ways to take it down, it can ruin you. But nah, we'll leave it. We'll leave it in B tier. We'll blame it on Saipat for being a little strong. Nesla. Where's my cursor over here, but I'm dragging it over there. Nesla's probably also in B tier. It's got a good offensive typing. It's a bit slower than it wants to be. Its defenses, like defense HP, are a bit lower than it wants to be. But it's got Prio with Water Blade, Aquatic Whirlwind, and a strong electric move turn 1 with Thunder Strike. So overall, it's solid. Does what it wants to do. It's really just kind of I click my stabs every turn, which is a lot of Tems nowadays. And then having an immunity to lightning is good. If you want a water but can't afford an electric weakness, Nesla's your go-to. It's very valuable that way. Or Babo, I guess, but I feel like Nesla's another option, especially for faster teams. We got Valiar. So Valiar was solid B tier for a couple patches before I started doing tier lists, and then it lost. Or then Bamboozle went on a hold, and it lost Black Hole, dropped down to like D tier, then it got Black Hole back up to C tier, and now it got Bamboozle relatively back, at least turn 1. So it's definitely between B tier and B plus tier. The reason why I'd even consider it in B plus tier, because I know some of you are just like, what? Is because it is such just a control machine. Things popping out evasion and hypno and more evasion and more hypno. It means that if you're not immune to sleep, or if you don't predict the right slot that gets bamboozled, or if you're not faster, Valiar can win a game on its own. It's that type of Tem. So I mean, there's a few factors that can really just Valiar can just destroy. And I love Valiar, so I'm glad to see it a little bit. And also, it is a huge pain to play against. you basically need Prio. You need a new speed breakpoint to pay attention to is Valiar with Fat Burner. That max speed for sure. I think it's 310. So to outspeed that with Prio, I think you need like 207, 208 speed. So just keep that in mind if you're running a Chimerian. Make sure to reach that. For Glass Blade, at least. It could definitely be B tier, but I think we're going to see a lot more of it because it gets so much value anytime that it's faster. And even if it's not faster, getting a Hypno for even one turn on a fast Tem or a Bamboozle can still be game-changing. Also, Black Hole to white buffs is another just great option that it has. Ultrasound for stamina control. Thing's finally in a good spot, but you don't have to be afraid of it for damage, just as its support capabilities. That's the one bright side. Lowaddle, it's going to be in the same tier as Pocus. This, once again, it's just like if I was doing a tier list of combos, like Lowaddle Pocus would be up there. If you don't have a mental, and a mental that happens to be able to hit Lowaddle or Pocus for super effective damage, then good luck. I wish you the best, because they will put you to sleep. If you don't have energy drink or bait either, I guess, but it's just they can get through bait with Mom's Lunch, and it's just a combo that can control you to death with sleep, freeze, and evasion, sort of with Bush. And then he gets a penance off, and it can flip a game, but it's just so inconsistent due to its mediocre speed and terrible defensive typing. I think Lowaddle gets the award for worst defensive typing in the game. So I mean, it's actually B tier. It's not B minus. It's not C tier because it does have that niche, and it does it well. Like no other Tem has that. No other team functions like Lowaddle at all, or Tem, but it doesn't excel. I don't think it could get nerfed with blue screen, but for Lowaddle's purposes, I'm not sure how much that matters. Maybe it would. I don't know. I'd say just leave it in B tier. Call it good. Still got a lot left. Might try and speed up the last few of them, but we got Calibus. Calibus is a bit tough because it's almost like better Guldur and worse Platamus. Because Calibus has the crazy good typing of Platamus, and even a little better because with Mucus you can have a pseudo, like pseudo-neutral damage from electric, but you also gain a resist to toxic. But at the same time, you're not really dealing damage. Aquastone was kind of nice for it, because now it has a damaging option, but you weren't always running that anyways. But it spreads Toxic Ticks, has Strangle. It's a decent support, and it's so flippin' tanky, but it's also relatively ignorable. I think B tier's fine for it. Adoro, and then we got the birds. Adoro, I think, is also okay. Toxic Skin getting more in line is kind of put Adoro at about B tier. Denigrate is still a bit overtuned in my opinion. It just gives so much value for a single move to click. However, Adoro, like, it has its weaknesses. It's still got super strong special defense and even respectable defense right now. But it's fine in B tier. Like, Adoro's not gonna carry a whole lot of games. It'll counter a lot of Tems, and it's a decent enabler, and it's kind of annoying with Toxic Skin, but it only procs once. It's just kind of a tanky nuisance. Sometimes it's an insta ban, sometimes it's just whatever for your team. Depends on how many physical attackers you have. I'd leave it in B. Alright, now I got the birds. Tukai, even with its spread options, you just don't want to click spread, because even if you're dealing... I went through this in a recent video. If you talk... let's say you're using spreader, and you hit 2 Tems for like 80% of their health, but in the process you lose one of your Tems from full health. If you technically lost 100% health, but you gained 160% damage on your opponents. Question is, did you win the trade? And that question is, are you faster? Because if your opponents are faster, then even though they're at 20% health, it doesn't matter, because they still get another hit off. And if they're not faster, then they probably didn't take 80%. They probably took like 20 or 30%, and you'd need 2 turns to get that amount of value out of them. And Tukai's defensive typing is just bad. It's just hard to justify. It has a niche, but it needs some help. I don't know what you could give Tukai that doesn't make it completely busted or just help it. Maybe it's just always been a bad meta for it, with so many winds and toxics around to resist its main stabs. But this meta's not it either. Tolkien, I don't think I've ever seen Tolkien fall below A. It hasn't been nerfed. Tolkien's got a really low base stat total, but its ability to burn, it's good to amazing defensive typing, is prio all the time. It's got a nuke option with fire tornado, heater, burn supports. It's got options. It does everything it wants to. Great typing, like I mentioned. Thing's honestly just a little loaded. I always find it frustrating to play against. It's just fast enough too. It's not fast, but it's just fast enough to outspeed most things that it wants to. With enough speed invest. Tuvine's probably B+. I'm gonna put Tarak here too at the same time, because these two function very similarly. There are winds that resist toxic damage, and that in itself is extremely valuable, because you want to bring your winds in against toxics. And both are common bait users. Both have turn 1 stab options for both of their typings. Both have turbine, physical winds. I mean, they're very strong. They get to do exactly what they want to, and it's basically just click stab options when they're super effective. It's actually kind of funny how similar they are, but I guess it's the same evolution line, so it makes enough sense. 2-wire. I mean, 2-wire's solid. It does what it wants to with Common Factor. If you need a neutrality support, you're probably going to go with 2-wire over Pigment Inverter Chromion. Just because it's free. You don't have to attack yourself to get it. You can't do the combos with it nearly as well, but it's a standalone Tem a little bit more. You can actually take advantage of its good offensive typing now after the first turn. So, like, let's say your opponent has like an electric. You can double in turn 1 to that electric and just finish it off, hopefully turn 2. And then all of a sudden your 2-wire gets gets to roam free. But it's not. But digital wind is an awful typing. You're still weak to digital water outside of electric. Yeah, I guess those are the only two, but it's good offensively. And it still offers that support that keeps its niche there. So I like it. It's good. But it's not amazing. Tutu's kind of in this... This is going to be a bit controversial, alright? Like, ever since the Two Eyes lost Nox Bomb in like 1.6.2, except Tukai, which is a joke, but that really hit Tutsu quite a bit. Because Tutsu loved Nox Bomb. I feel like we could give Nox Bomb back to Tutsu, because right now its moveset typically consists of Feathergat and Haito. That's pretty much it. It's got two moves that consistently runs, and one of them is a melee move on a hold. So it doesn't have a turn 1 melee, so turn 1 it's functionally a mono wind. It's certainly to keep its very good trait of tag team in check, but it just feels like almost too much of a punishment. You can run Wrenching Massage, but then it's a low prio move on a faster Tem. And without synergy, and it takes a ton of stamina too. You can run Double Gash, but that does very low damage. You can run Show Off for scaling, but Tutsu almost functions as a support. You can run Zen Med, but Zen Med takes 2 hold and is low prio. So I feel like Tutsu needs a little something. And I think if you give it Nox Bomb back, that would be enough to move it back into B tier. But right now, all it is a trait bot. And I guess it kind of was before, but it at least could have some amount of offensive threat. And right now, it doesn't even really have that. So please give Tutsu Nox Bomb back. That's all it needs. Kinu. Did Kinu get something? I don't think it did. I was trying to remember. Like, it's a little confusing to remember the actual patch notes and then all the fake patch notes we made. Because I think most people mentioned Kinu getting a little bit of something. It wasn't a whole lot. Because Kinu is so close to being good. I think it just needs a little bit of speed. I think that's what it needs. Just so that it can outspeed stuff like Hazrat with Lava Wave and Wastewater. At least Lava Wave when it's not prio. And then put it to sleep. Because Kinu is probably your premier Hypno and Turbo support, because it also has other support options with either like Kaleidoscope Lifeless Sap and Revit, and also 2 damaging types rather than Nox and Grandpa's 1. But it struggles with just having very low HP and defense that it doesn't see a whole lot of use, and it's kind of a bad defensive typing. If it can swap in Outspeed and get a Hypno off, that's valuable, and then Benefactor and Protector are both good traits. It really doesn't need very much, but it is just barely under the curve in my opinion. Just give it a little speed, like 4 or 5 points. I don't know what it was, just a little bit. Volcrane probably also in C. We saw a really senior plat once again. He used Volcrane. He was actually self-hooking to proc Reactive Vial, so he would take less damage and still gain the attack boost. I think that was a really cool and interesting strategy, but if that's what you have to do to your Volcrane to make it useful in any way, like viable at all, that's tough. Like, you don't want to be doing that every single game. You don't have a good fire move until turn 3. It has both Rockfall and Stone Trench for some reason now. Earth move, it doesn't even have a great single target Earth move. Stone Ball's low prio and Soil Steam requires an item. Volcrane is in a weird speed tier where it wants to be fast, but even if you invest max speed, it can't outspeed the stuff it really wants to. So it kind of needs a speed boost. So you almost want a turbo partner for it, but most things that Volcrane could do that way, Osekai does better. I guess it kind of depends on, maybe you want evasion over just raw damage that Osekai offers. I'd say they almost function really similarly, but also Volcrane has lower special defense. And also, like, Osakai's hook does damage. Volcrane's doesn't. Volcrane doesn't have any meaningful priority unless you run Ninja, and even then, it's a 2-hold, and you probably want to click Meteorite anyways. I think Volcrane just struggles. It needs a little something. Pig! I love Pig. I love Pig. Gigapick. But why am I putting in B- tier? I should put it in B tier. Like, I think Pick can easily get by without any changes. It still has all of its support niches. It just got Bamboozle back to turn 1 as well, which I sort of forgot about when I placed it in B- there. So that does help it a lot, because now the support, like, stall set is useful a bit more again. I think its friendship set is relatively good. I think friendship could get buffed to 20%, and I think Pig could gain like 15, 20 stats and special attack, which sounds like a lot, but it has 45 right now, which is extremely low. And if you gave it like 15, it would have almost as much as Moments, which still isn't a lot. Moments is extremely low. But it would allow it to click Sharp Rain even without investment, and that would give you another type for comboing. Because one of the things I found with my Pig team was that I wanted to be able to kill Hedgens, and I struggled with that. But if I had Sharp Rain, I would be able to one-shot them if I had just a bit of special attack. But I couldn't do it with base special attack Sharp Rain, which was kind of nuts. So I think Pig could just use some special attack. It shouldn't really break it or anything. It'll just help that one specific niche. But I think it's fine. Like, it doesn't need those. It's just kind of like a personal request for it. Getting down there. We got Acronox. Acronox is also B tier. It's a toxic that performs well. It does what it wants to. It has strong both stabs. Ever since Sting got buffed to special attack instead of physical attack, it's been a great change for it. And the stat buffs it got were kind of random and maybe too much. But it's not. It's probably just a higher B tier, if anything, and that's mainly because its typing carries it. And then having a priority toxic move that doesn't require synergy is also valuable. And it's just like, oh, my Acronox is about to die. Click Sting, does the raw damage it deals normally, and also applies 2 toxic ticks. It's a very strong move, but it's a signature, so it's fair. I mean, Acronox does what it wants to. It doesn't excel, and it doesn't fall short. It's about in a good spot. That's why I'm putting it in B. I could just, if I changed Acronox at all, I'd want its defenses to drop a little bit lower, but, you know, like, it doesn't need it. It still clicks Venom Spread when it wants, otherwise Soil Steam. We got the Koishes now, but like I said, I will get to those at the end. Just maybe like 1 or 2 of the more viable types. Volphy. So you'd think after losing Sludge Give, Volphy would be like, oh man, this Tem is useless again. No, I'd say it's still like B+. Because, I mean, being weak to only 1 typing is huge in itself, and only being 2x and still having resistances. It's relatively similar to Volarend, except Volarend has many more resistances, and especially more useful ones as well. Volphy does have more prio options, though, because it's just Plague, but being able to click Exhaust and deal good damage is strong. And then it can still alternate between Dust Vortex and Sandstorm to have an Earth-type move up always. And then it even has room for an extra support move. It randomly got +3 defense this patch, which kind of helps it defensively. Like, it didn't need it, but it got it, and that helps it. I don't know why. I wouldn't put it in A tier, though. It's not the menace that it used to be, but it's still up there. It's still lower. Like, it doesn't have the stats it really wants. It doesn't have, like, its speed is only base 60. That's not all that fast. It's actually kind of slow. And then its special attack is also really mediocre. It's super strong in situations where it has type advantage, and really it's just an exhaust support in any other situation. That's about it. But I still put it in B+ tier. I still think it's a bit overtuned. I think. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Like it's like I was thinking of my own patch notes. I was like, I gave it Clay Ball and Chain Heal back because I almost want to. I want to bring back its viability and stall a little bit, but maybe that would be too much. I don't. We're gonna leave it in B plus just because it's so consistent and splashable. But I think it's an argument for B tier. I'd say it's a low B plus. Saying a low B plus is so weird. Waspine, man, they changed Swarmade a little bit. It's supposed to be like 15% true damage and then 10% heal, which is a 50% health swing, and then with synergy, it's 20% damage and 20% heal, I think. Because I think you get the 10% heal, and then you also get a tick of regen. So it's like an 80% swing then. So, but the thing is, they gave it 4 hold. Like 4 hold! When are you going to click that? And even if you do, it's on such a slow tem, it sounds like more than it actually is. I think that was an over nerf. And it doesn't even hit Waspine where it really... No, wait, why'd I put it in C? Yeah, I forgot that Waspine has its viability in stall team or in the control teams. It's also a component of the Pocus, Lawaddle, Gallios core, pain in the butt teams with blue screen and crystal deluge crap. So it still has that going for it, and it does that really well. It does. You deal any damage to it, but you don't kill it. It heals it back with Royal Jelly. And Kinu is usually a part of those cores as well, so you could argue that it goes higher there, but nah. I think in general Kinu's a bit lower, because Kinu doesn't really fit a niche that nothing else does. It just fits other niches that doesn't do well. Waspine kind of has its own niche, or at least it's very similar niche to other stuff in this rank tier, so we'll just leave it there. I mean, Waspine's a lot more complicated than that, and I think it could use some different changes. Like, Wax Bath was so weird for it to get, and then they haven't done anything with it since, so I don't know. But we're just going to leave it there. Moments. What do you do with Moments? I think Moments... I don't know. Okay, this might be one of the harder ones for me to choose. Moments is a tem where it can get 0 use on a team if you have adequate counters. But if you don't, then it gets a lot of value. So I guess it's kind of like Valiar in that way. We're going to put it in B plus tier. It's kind of tough to counter, and from my experience, the thing eats a lot of bans just because you don't have adequate counters. And then it's just like, well, shoot, I don't want to deal with that. It'll just destroy my team. Gets 1 block up, it has natural high special defense, all of a sudden you can't kill the thing. So it revits and it's got its passive, refurbished. Takes you down with Plasma Beam even if you have 0 offense investment. And then that's not even talking about if it gets buffs from a stall team or has synergy for Digithreat. So yeah, I think B plus is a good spot for Moments. It's kind of weird because I'm putting Moments in B plus, but I honestly don't think it needs any changes. So it's just like I could almost put it in B tier for that reason, but I think it's weird. I think it's a little above the curve, but I think that's okay because I think the archetype that it fits into, which being like stall, needs the boost that it has, and so I'm fine with it being where it's at. Hazrat. I don't know why. Hazrat was another one that's kind of weird. It didn't get hit. They changed it at some point in 1.5, one of the sub patches for it, where Toxic Farewell got changed from 3 ticks of poison on one target to one tick on both targets, and then 7% on the killer. So, I don't know. Some people say that's better. I think it might be a slight nerf, but overall it's almost exactly the same. It's like a 5% health difference, so it's just kind of whatever. But Hazoret's offensive typing is crazy good. It has scaling with heat up. Even has potential evasion with Toxin Shower, not that it runs it. It has priority for both of its stabs with Lava Wave Synergy and Venomous Claws. And then it also has Wastewater and Lava Wave for hard hitting both of its stabs. Hazoret's kind of got a loaded kit. Strong defensive typing. Does get walled by Earth, but that's it. If your opponent doesn't have Earths, good luck. Hope you got a fast wind with Tornado. And I hope that's a squishy rat that it actually dies. Yeah. It can also chip down with Toxic Ticks. It has Embers. It's one of the best users of Embers because it gives it pseudo bulk by lowering your opponent's attack. Yeah. Minotaur. Minotaur is going to be a Tem that will kind of come in and out of the meta. This isn't one of the better metas for it. It's had good metas in the past. Arguably, like, there should be another physical mental move that it can have that's not Black Hole, so it's not useless until turn 2 mental-wise. You know what? Yeah, so Minotaur is kind of weird. Its trait is so strong that they've crippled it on both sides of its typing. Both sides! Because its best electric option is Hasty Lunge, which OX is it if it doesn't have Hasty Lunge or Synergy. And has a ton of stamina anyways for mediocre damage. But then you also have Black Hole, which is low prio, can't even take advantage of its speed if you don't have Synergy. And it's on a hold. I mean, it's got decent defensive type chart with a few resistances and only like 2 weaknesses. Oh no, it's got 3 weaknesses. Yeah, so I mean, I think Minotaur is actually a little below the curve. It has a niche, and it actually performs it well. Just by being a fast, free scaling speed threat. But while it performs its niche well, as a Tem, overall, it doesn't perform well. And also, Ruminant is not even a trait right now. Please, just make it also give healing, not just stamina. Oh, and how long has this been going on? We've been... Oh man, it's gonna be a long video. Hope. Moala. I don't think anyone's even touched Moala ever since the patch. Hypnotist got hit really hard, or Moala just did in general, because Hypnotist is down to 1 turn, which is fair, because 2 turns was definitely too much. But it also lost Zen Med, which is the move that it really wanted to click, and was kind of the whole reason you ran Moala. Because it was like just the scaling option. It kind of differentiates it and allows Haka to have a little bit more of a use, but Haka, you don't run a Tem to get plus 25% attack on and special attack on 1 Tem. It just, you don't do that. You don't. And so Moala's kind of just in shambles. I don't want to put it in D tier because Hypnotist, even at 1 turn, is not to be completely ignored. 1 turn of tempo just for pivoting in and taking 2 hits. It also has Black Hole. It's not like it doesn't have options. It still has a few sleep options. It has Black Hole to wipe stuff. And it does have a high attack stat and a great offensive typing, even though it's terrible defensive. So it's better than Taifu, you know? It's better than Taifu. Venmet's going to be in B-. Oh, we'll leave these 2. I should do Venks first. Well, we'll do both of them at the same time. So Venks and Venmet, they're very similar. It's like, yes, Venmet has the melee typing, but essentially they're both kind of slow neutral hitters. Venks doesn't have coverage, but melee coverage on a neutral doesn't really help all that much. Carrier buff you would think would help Vex a little bit more, but the thing is it's still competing with other neutrals. Most of the time you're still going to run either Momo, Mooflank, or Yowler for anything you'd want Vex for. Venmet's, it's got Aggressor, but the attack boost for the defense loss kind of hurts, and because like Venmet would really benefit from one more move slot option, being because it wants to run hook kick, because it wants to run base jump, savage, ninja, and uppercut, and it would love to run hook kick, so it has a bit of a stronger melee option, but it can't because it just needs the others for consistency. The only thing that, and then Venmet usually runs strangle instead of uppercut since it doesn't have it. But neither of them are just super great, and even Ventil finally moved out of C and D tier because it has Phantom Whiplash. I tried it a little bit. It still hurts pretty bad. It's still tough because it can be a threat. But if you're comparing it to like Auhi and Mix, it's really tough to justify running Ventil because Mix is like so much more free to get off the special attack buffs. And you're not lowering your special defense. You have time split on Ventil, so you can kind of time split into, or strangle into time split into Phantom Whiplash or something. That's kind of what you got to hope for, but it's a bit tough to pull off when you have a Tem as squishy as Ventil with as bad of a type chart. I don't know what you could do. It's almost like Spiritual Ingressor needs some sort of buff. Vex is probably fine where it's at because it is a pre-evolution. And it does have, it's just kind of like a ball of stats. Sometimes it'll be useful, sometimes it won't. It's I don't know, you'd think this was exactly what Ventil needed. And it kind of is, but even Ventil at its best still just isn't that good. Because even if you pivot around a couple times, get a few spiritual buffs, and then finally click a like high prio Phantom Whiplash after your +3 special attack or something, let's say. Does that still kill something? Not always. It doesn't always kill. If it was a guaranteed kill, I'd say absolutely, but it doesn't always kill. So it can be tough. Chimerian. Chimerian's also an A tier. I mean, Chimerian is really your go-to crystal right now. Crystals are almost like a must-have on most teams. There are quite a few fire types that are relevant right now, because before it used to mainly just be Hazrat and Tolkien, but now it's also kind of Raiken and Bastion on a bit of a more niche level that you got to be afraid of. Oh, and Auhi. I forgot Auhi as well. It's also a fire type. Definitely got to be afraid of that. Maybe Tyrannac too, but it's just basically Chimerian does have a few more threats, but in general, it's still going to be your go-to for a lot of things. Its offensive typing is great. Defensively, it's got great stats, and it's only still got 2 weaknesses. Got good resistances. It's normally running bait, so you can avoid toxic ticks immediately. Hostile gives us so much upfront damage. It's just the biggest disadvantage to Chimerian is that its nature option is Frondo it being low prio, but that's still okay because it can do so many. You can just do so much damage if it gets it off. And the sharpening for free scaling with attack and speed too. I forgot about that, but that's a big one. Having scaling on a Tem like that with already a naturally high speed and high attack, boosting it even further can be game changing. Arachnites. I'm gonna leave Arachnite in B tier for now, but I think it just hasn't been experimented with quite enough yet. I think it's at least B tier, potentially B+ tier. Overclock was exactly what it needed, and I think, and I love Arachnite now. It's still a bit bugged with its whole adaptive trait thing, but it is a menace. You cannot ignore the thing. Even if you aren't running it damage-wise, you can still run it with support options being like Cozy Net, and it can still put a few holes in your team. So, Digiprotection buff didn't really help it at all. It's really the adaptive set you gotta worry about. Digiprotection would help, but it's just if you're facing a Digi team, it's just gonna get banned. It's kind of plain as that, plain and simple. Munko, I'm also putting Munko in A tier. I don't care what anyone says. This time is stupid broken. The fact that most 2Xs don't kill a Munko, and yet it still deals so much damage, and it has one of the best offensive types in the entire game, is kind of absurd to me. I know it's slower, but it has such a high HP stat. The fact that it can take a hit. Why can't I Cold Geyser and kill it? Why can't I T-Strike and kill it? Like, I'm investing max. I'm like, why does it outspeed my Psypad after a fast charge? Oh, it's just... It just hits too many things, takes too many hits. And it has all the move options it wants. I don't know, I just hate the thing. I think it's just so strong all around. And then it's part of the devastating core of Munko's wherever Zalbian is. Oh yeah, Munko's Zalbian and I don't need to point to Munko's Zalbian Ragnet. That's the combo, because if you're facing an electric type, then Ragnet just takes it, and then Munko's not threatened. If you're facing a water type, you get Prio on Electric Punch. You just punch the thing and probably kill it. You can finish off with a Synergy Harmful Microwaves. And if you're facing a digital, it's the same thing. Your Ragnet can threaten it. So even the harmful microwaves. So it's just devastating. It's just, yeah. Alright, it's plain and simple. Anatan, we're going to last few of them. I'm burning out a little bit. Anatan, I think I put Anatan in B- last time, but I think that was wrong. I think I could have put it in B. Anatan is not bad. It, in fact, is a very strong Tem. The thing is that it is always going to be meta-dependent. Always, always, always. Because it counters some types completely and utterly, and then other ones it is extremely weak to. Earth types, yeah. I think it's melted by Earth. Which seems weird because he's the fire type. He also gets walled by fires. But it's hard to imagine what else Anatan could get that it would actually want as part of its kit. I think it's fine. Like, it wins a lot of neutral matchups and late game situations. It's just that it will always struggle in some matchups. You can't bring an Anatan and expect to win every match. It will be sometimes a win con, sometimes you just use it as a trap support with Chains Hit. I think that's fine though. I think Anatan's fine. Tyrannak. Yeah, Tyrannak almost always floats around B+. One of crazy good defensive typing, probably second or third in the game, just when compared to Volorend and Volphy. It's only got the one weakness being to Toxic, but that is still the most common type in the game. However, Intimidator is one of the better traits in the game because it cancels out all other traits. So you can completely ruin some Tems by having it around. They finally fixed the bug with its so it only works as a few turns, so now it'll always be 3 turns. And actually, funny enough, the Slingshot buff is actually really great for Tyrannak, because now it has a good turn 1 nature move. And it's cheap too, so it can click it without losing almost any stamina. So that was a huge buff for it. I'm curious to see how people... I mean, it's not like people are going to change their teams to work with Tyrannak anymore, but... I'm curious to see if people will trade off their stamina items on Tyrannak for just Slingshot for a cheap stamina efficient option. Volgon. Volgon's team dependent, but very solid. 2 solid traits. Short Circuit's a little niche, but it does exactly what it wants to it's kind of like infectious. If your opponent has a whole lot of stat changes, then yes, Short Circuit can get a lot of value. If not, well, it probably doesn't do a whole lot. But the super conduct is super generally strong. Yeah, I lied. We're going to put Volgon in B+2 because Strangle Ampere with Adrenaline Shot is probably a bit too strong. Probably got to drop Ace Shot combo on it because it's a bit overtuned, but only so much that can be done. And then it's still got other flexible support options too if you don't run those, because it's got Cage, it's got damage with Blizzard, so you can hit Toxic super effective as well. Willpower Drain and stuff too. It's very flexible, good at what it does, and even goes a little above and beyond. So I think I could use Minor Stat Nerf or lose Strangle or something. I think losing Strangle would be the best. Gallios. So Gallios got hit pretty hard. It kind of got crept after they fixed it up to like B plus, maybe even A tier, because they gave it beta burst, but then changed how its signature worked. But it was still able to get a signature off in 3 turns, and then its passive off, and heal back up to full health. But now it's really tough to get its passive off. You kind of just gotta play it as a normal. I mean, I haven't figured it out yet. I really haven't played a whole lot with Gallios, but it seems like you can't completely play around your trait anymore. Kind of just got to play it as an Earth Mental type that takes pressure off your team, because it needs to be dealt with, otherwise it can deal a whole bunch of damage. But I mean, it also has options for buff, so it'll probably have a spot on bruiser teams. It is still a very unique typing in the game that I think has a lot of uses just existing. So that's why I'm putting it in B tier, even though I think it can still function fine as this Tem. It's just not going to be completely trait reliant anymore, which I also think is kind of interesting. I hope to see it a little bit more in the coming patches. All right, so that's all of the main Tems. You can see we got 1 S tier and 1 D tier. So whatever. We'll just place a couple Quaishas and Chromions first. Then I'll go over my overall thoughts. Water Chromion seeing some use, kind of niche, B-. Nature Chromion, relatively consistent, B tier, same as Electric Chromion. Melee Toxic Chromion, a little bit useful, B-, but they each have their flaws. Quaishas, Wind Quaish is seeing some use, B-. Fire Quaish, same, B-. Electric Quaish is probably definitely B, maybe even B+, just because it also fits on the Digicores. Nature Quaish, also B. Mental Quaish, I'm actually not seeing a whole lot. Digiquaish, I thought it was going to be B+ tier, but it's kind of just B tier. And that's about it. I lied. We're going to put Digiquaish in B+ tier, because it makes my tier list round out easier. Or we're going to put like Nature Quaish in B-. Yeah, I like that better. I mean, Nature Quaish, when you're countered by the most common type in the game, and also you can't hit fires or natures very well, it's still just cheese. Fire Quaish has Quetzal. It's seen some use, just with Synergy Master. It's kind of nice as a component on Quetzal teams. If you want a Quetzal user that has multiple types and isn't Aohi, it's alright. Wind Quaish is seeing some amount of use as either both Synergy Master and Iridescence. Kind of can freeze stuff, get Hypnos off. It's kind of like a control option, but also Debris Typhoon hits like a truck. Toxic Chromion, I mean, I used Toxic Chromion for a while. It's really strong with Sinner Typer and Venom Spread, but that's a bit of a hard combo to pull off. Melee Chromion's basically the same as Munko, except it can't take a hit, so it's more like niche Munko. Water Chromion has Water Blade, probably, but it's got a kind of a unique typing where it's 4x weak. It's littered with weaknesses, honestly. No, it's not. It's only got like 2 weaknesses. It's like Electric and Nature. And Digi. Okay, 3. But, Water Blade is strong. You have Prio for both typings, which is something that most other Chromions don't have. Or at least irrelevant Prio, because Water Blade actually does an amount of damage. And that's kind of why Chromion's in B-. It's seeing some use. I don't even really know why people are using it a whole lot. Water Cannon maybe combos well with toxic types. Yeah, don't know, but it's being used. And then Nature Chromion's just the best Digi typing in the game, because it's only got 2 weaknesses, hits stuff hard still. Electric Chromion combos well with itself, with Mimit, also a component of Digi teams. Electric Chromion, or Quaish, gives Synergy Master for harmful microwaves and gets Synergy Master with Electro Punch, or Synergy Adapt, but whatever. And then Digiquaish is just, with Iridescence, it's probably your best Quaish go-to, because not only do you get the Zen Med and Hypno options that a Quaish normally comes with, but you also get Faraday Cage to hit with like the best offensive typing in the game, and you can also get Synergy for Toxic Ticks, not take any damage because of Iridescence, and you can't get hit super effective, and it's just valuable in that way. Whew. Okay, that's finally it. That was a lot. I was thinking like, oh, I'm not going to do this on stream. It'll go faster this time. Yeah, no, I was wrong. I could talk about Temtem for hours and hours and days. So I really like this patch. I think Creme is going in the right direction. You guys can maybe tell with only one D tier this time. And even though there is an S tier, unlike last time, it's Tataru and it's kind of kept, like, it's gonna get nerfed. Like, the thing is, I don't have to really worry about S tiers all that much because they're gonna get hit. Hopefully in 1.6.1. It's the A tiers that I'm a little bit sad that aren't getting hit. And I know that there's some Tems probably in B plus tier that you guys are like, why isn't this an A? Grunder, maybe. But either way, what I'd like is to see the A tiers drop, just because so many of them have been so consistent through the patches. I want to see Tolkien, Nidristil, Platamus, Munko lose a little bit of power. It's good to see stuff like Valiar raise up to B plus tier. And I mean, the B minuses aren't even all that bad. Like, the C tiers probably should be looked at. But the only reason the C tiers are mostly the same, except they also kind of have a lot of the D tiers that are no longer D tier. You got like Volcrane, you got Gul'dir, but Valiar is up in B plus, I think. But yeah, I'm a little bit burnt, but I hope this was a great resource for you guys. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments, and I'll try and answer them. This is, like I said, it's for the current moment. I tried to ignore bugs as far as when I'm placing Tems and tiers here, and sometimes maybe even 2 weeks into a patch is still too early. And it's okay if you disagree with some of my placements here. You don't have to agree with all of them. I want to give a good resource, so if people are just like, well, let me slap 8 of the top tiers Tems on a team. Alright, well, you're more than welcome to do that. There's a reason they're top tier. Yeah, that's good. I think I mentioned it at the start, but I should have some timestamps in the description if you guys want to just go and look through each individual Tem. It will take me a little bit of time to get that together, so if you're like notification squad, you probably won't have it, but yeah, I'll get them there soon enough. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.